$104 million. So on the surface, we propose to spend in the county budget this fiscal year $104 million based on $97 or $98 million worth of revenue. So as Bob would say, hey, that's deficit spending, and it's true. And it's true if that's all the money you have to deal with, but it doesn't take into consideration the accumulation of revenues that came in prior years. I mean, right just before, like 2 weeks before the end of the fiscal year, our PILT money from the feds, which is the money that they pay us, used to be like 10 cents on the dollar or 40 cents on the dollar when it came to the federal lands in the holdings of the BLM, which is like 1 million acres. And historically, we'd get maybe 400,000. They give us, 20 cents on the dollar. This is a program that goes back to the 70s that the federal government felt guilty because they have all these lands in the West, and it's a primary revenue source for a lot of counties in the western United States, and everything west of the Mississippi. We're small compared to some of Nevada. It's like 87% federally owned. So it's those kind of properties that aren't paying property tax, and that's what payment in lieu of taxes stands for, PILT. It's a big battle, takes place every year. And the question is, how much is Congress willing to fork up in terms of meeting their obligation that's set in law? And normally we're lucky if we get 20 cents on the dollar, 40 cents on the dollar. Those are in the early years. By the 80s, when Reagan was there, it got up to around 50 cents on the dollar. And during the Clinton and early Bush years, it got up to maybe 60 or 70 cents on the dollar. We started getting checks for like $1 million, and we normally would see maybe 4 or 5, maybe 600,000 was a good year. And I know it used to freak out the auditor's office because what do you do with this extra money? Because they figured there was a mistake made. So that money was set aside and put into a reserve account in case somebody woke up and said, hey, we overpaid them and you need to give us our money back. And that happens from time to time. The state is notorious for that. But that money has been kind of accumulating there. The payment we got this year was, what was it, $1,800,000 or $1,750,000. It was getting close to $2 million, which is about 125% of what the normal allocation is supposed to be based on that original law. And it was interesting, starting around 2008, 2009, when the economy crashed, and the outgoing Bush administration and incoming Obama administration, remember we had the R monies, and we had to stimulate the economy, we had to get monies to the local level. Well, somebody discovered that pipeline into local government, and so for the last 5, 6 years, Congress has been, with the administration, has been dumping 100% if not more. And so we've been used to getting now for about 4 or 5 years checks that are in the neighborhood of 1.4, 1.5, now up to about 1.8 million on an allocation that we used to only get maybe 400,000 to 600,000 in a normal funded type of a year. And so it's a consistent pattern. And so those monies come in, and those are the kind of monies that are deposited in our account. So this year, we basically, after we approved the budget, if you look at the budget sheets that were before us at the time we approved it, there was $19 million sitting there. Now, I will say, I agree with Richard, 3.1 million of that is the general reserve, and I'd be totally opposed to us using any money out of that to fund anything. That's, as far as I'm concerned, is totally hands-off. You segregate out, and you can do round ballpark figures, but I'd like to know exactly how much of that is road money that is set aside, can only be spent for road, because if you do anything other than that, you'll have Nan upstairs chopping off your fingers, because that's her job. And I tell you, those cost accountants in Sacramento that deal with gas tax and road funds, they don't, if the general fund is to borrow a shovel, and they use a shovel out of the road truck, they'll send you a bill for it. Now, if the road department uses a shovel out of a general fund, public works truck, that's fine. They go ahead and use it. It doesn't cost anything. They just, what's theirs is theirs, and they just do it. But that's the way that game is played. So segregate those dollars. Health and Human Services, you're not going to take the money that comes in. We're not going to do like Modoc County, where you take the school monies to pay for the hospital bill. That's, that sends you to jail. Fortunately, so far, nobody's up there gone to jail. But that's the kind of stuff that they don't let you do. And when you get done with that, okay, of that $19 million that we did not budget, okay, there's more than a few $1 million that I think you'll find that we would have potentially above and beyond the general reserve. And that's not counting the money that's sheltered in the heater fund, or maybe monies that possibly have been paid into Trendell. I mean, we pay our advance payments, and Richard sits on that board. I know a couple years ago we were able to extract a pretty good chunk of change, and that's what we use to be able to fund our OPEB obligations and setting up that trust account to make us debt-free on that end of it. I mean, those funds are there, even if it's just a couple $100,000. So to me, I think we have somewhere between $3 and $5 million that's kind of floating around in the system after you segregate all the reserve accounts and after you segregate the general reserve dollars that I think that this board has available to them to fund. Now, whether we want to spend it on something like this or we want to spend it on facilities for they're not monies that I feel that we should be using for ongoing operating expenses. They should be used for one-time investments, because in most cases some of these funds are just one-time in nature. But it's about time we start using those one-time nature, because each year, if you look at our budget numbers, I was talking about $5, $7, $8 million 10 years ago, and now it's kind of grown up. It's in the neighborhood of 20 million, approaching 20 million and beyond. And in 10 more years, if we keep that same practice going, you're going to be talking about 30 million. So you think about $20 million out of a $100 million budget. That's like a 20% reserve when it comes down to it. And generally the state, when they start seeing that, they're going to say, well, why are we giving them money and funding these programs? Because we go down there with the message that the counties have been ripped off, we have no monies to do anything and give us some help and give us some relief. And then they discover you're sitting on a pile of cash. They're going to not only not give you the relief you're looking for, but they're going to look at ways to transfer that money from your pot back to their pot, because they're going to be of the opinion it's their money anyway.
Thanks. Thank you. So, if I could just chime in, I mean, I think, you feel strongly that there are some potential.
Opportunities.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm of the opinion that if you could maybe work with the auditor and Richard and show the rest of the board that there is an opportunity without touching reserves, and maybe at the same time we uncover, if you will,
I want to fix up the courthouse and do a few other things.
not only monies to help loan to the JPA to make an interest on, also know exactly where we stand. I could see it. It's been many years of stuff, and maybe it's time to look in every crevice and do a house cleaning, if you will, and all that.
Another thing, Mr. Chairman, I think we need to throw in the equation. I'm going to use this as our opportunity. First of all, the JPA isn't operating out there in a vacuum. Whatever they decide to do or pursue or come up with in terms of what has to come back, if you look at the JPA when it was approved, the actual document that created the JPA requires both the City Council and the Board of Supervisors to approve whatever sort of financial, because the JPA, for all practical purposes, has no credit history, no credit. So their ability to go out and leverage, they don't really have it. And we're a creature of the two governing boards. So whatever, it's kind of like, being a kid and you're 16 and here's the keys to the car, but it takes the parent to countersign on the loan in order to be able to have the loan. So anything the JPA proposes really has to be ratified by both the council and the board. So the responsibility and authority lies here. It doesn't lie over there with that board. So they're only can do to what extent you're allowing them to be able to do. And I would hope that whatever plan we finally come up with and settle on as being one that everybody can agree on, if we can do that at all, then ultimately that whole document needs to be put into some sort of a referendum type of a measure and placed on the ballot for the voters to ratify. Not to necessarily, you can go ahead and build and do whatever, but to give the voters the opportunity to say, yes, we appreciate you putting together a thing and giving it the full force of the public vote. And that's only for one reason, in my opinion, and one reason only. That is to prevent the politics of the future. I've been around here long enough to watch it happen time and again. Have future elected officials unwind the watch because they can and crash whatever it is. So in other words, if they do that, they have to do it by a vote of the people. So put the power of the vote of the people over the next 10 to 15, 20 years behind the project, rather than depending upon council to council or board to board, depending upon who gets elected, who doesn't get elected, and what sort of perverse politics takes place in the back rooms of the community. Because that's the ultimate danger to any sort of a successful program. So if we're going to do it, let's do it and make sure it's done right, and do it with the full backing of the people. And if the people don't like it, then that's a clear indication that we didn't do a very good job, and maybe the whole thing gets boarded up and padlocked up until somebody comes along and figures out how to build the budget better. But that's one thing that needs to be done. And my attitude is I'm not afraid to go out and borrow the money. but I'm not interested in borrowing the money if I'm sitting on a pile of money that could be available. So that's what we have to sort out. How much do we have available? If it's only $1, then fine, it's only $1, and then we have to look at how we borrow the other $10. But if I've got $20 available and I need $2 for this, then I want to be able to use it for this as a policy measure rather than being forced to go through some sort of financing scheme, whereas Mr. Hancock put it well at the podium, where we're putting the money, our money, into somebody else's community's pocket.
I mean, it sounds like that's what the city's doing now, looking for everything, and I think that's what we should do. And answer the question, that is the $1 million question, is there money or is there not money?
Yeah.
We're getting, you know, Jim seems to think there is, and.
I'm using their figures, I'm not making this stuff up. The fact that they look at it differently is their.
What's available depends on what's, number one, right here, 6 million right here. Now, if you say it's something we need to put money aside for, it is not available. If you say it is, then it is available. I mean, what you're asking Richard to do, all 5 of us could do it differently.
This is not all gonna happen tomorrow. This is projected over the next 5 years, and that would be, I mean, I've seen 5-year plans like this here that are hanging around for 20 years.
Maybe because we got 16 or 18 million available, we should project this in 2 years.
Well, that's a choice, you know, I said, look, Bob, if you were able to get that done, I'd be happy to back you on that.
The point you're missing, I'm trying to make, is what's available is a matter of everyone's opinion.
Well, and that's why we have a board, and that's why we have the debate, and that's why we have the discussion. But I'm saying, and this is back to you, I agree with you on that perspective, we could commit those dollars, and if we did something with them, fine. But I'm not gonna sit here and let that money sit there unused for the next umpteen years, because nobody has the heart to actually implement these things after you create them. It's just another report sits on the shelf, collects dust. If I could take a small portion of that, a tenth of that, and put it to good use, and maybe put something like a swimming pool in place for this community. That's the choice I'm seeing available to me, okay? If we're not gonna spend the money, then I wanna use it. If we're gonna spend the money, then obviously we don't have the money, and let's start talking about financing, if that's what we're gonna do.
Well, I do not support what you guys are asking. I'll tell you that right
But I think until we come up with a figure that everybody is comfortable with as what is the available unrestricted funds, there's really, I mean, I appreciate, you know, you say you don't support it, but just hypothetically say, if they said, well, here's, here's
Well,
18
then
million
again, Larry, this
bucks.
is back to city, the teeter fund. I mean, you guys robbed that last budget to, balance the budget, so it was not a deficit budget.
I didn't, Robert, you did, you voted for the budget, not me.
I did. But I mean, that's the part of the money comes from. So it's a matter of, if you wanna take another million out of the teeter fund, I think that's irresponsible. I don't believe it's there. How much money did it actually take, at worst case scenario, by the time we're not collecting taxes and we're paying the student goes through?
From 1994 through 2012, $1.5 million of county general fund is what funded the teeter program, even during the dire years.
I used to pay 56 cents for diesel, now I'm paying $1.80 for off-road diesel, so I mean $3.80, so.
Well, taxes haven't gone up. Thank God for Prop 13, taxes haven't gone up like diesel has gone up. And I'm just saying is to have $3 million or even $2.5 million funded in there, when you have a program that historically operates on less than $1.5 million, that's the irony of it all.
And, I mean, you go down to the courthouse, a beautiful building, retaining wall around the side, on the lawn, you walk around the lawn. All chipping and falling apart, and it looks like hell.
I know, I've been trying to get you guys to
But
focus
yet we
on
got
that for
$19
15
million,
years.
and we can take 3 of it and put it in the pool. I mean, I don't get it. To me, it's.
Well, welcome to the party, because that's the message I've been trying to get you to focus on for 15 years, Bob.
I'd vote for that in a heartbeat, especially if I knew we had 19 million that's wandering around.
You don't have 19 million. Out of the 19 million, you may have 4 or 5 million. Because there's about 12 to 14 million of that is restricted by the general reserve, by roads, by those. So it's not 19.
I've learned all this in going on 16 years.
Can I suggest that this question needs to be answered?
Yeah,
The
it
sooner the
does.
better. Can't we,
Well-
Supervisor Chapman and yourself and Karen or Diane work together and let's put this issue to rest?
Okay, I would just make a couple of points. One, I don't see any harm in revisiting the teeter allocation.
Right.
It was funded at $1.5 million, as Supervisor Chapman mentioned. There's no magic to that number. As I've mentioned in the budget hearings, I just think it should be more a function of the delinquencies, which means
Yeah.
each year you would true it up. So we can visit that issue. With the Trindle money, we drew down many years of accumulated reserves at Trindle to fund our other post-employment benefits 3 or 4 years ago now. Since that time, since I've been on the board, we've been matching our deposits with Trindle to our actuarial liabilities funded at 95%. And we've been drawing down excess, if there was excess, annually to match that. So there isn't, as there was at one time, there is not a excess deposit on reserve with Trindle at this point. But I'd be happy to sit down with Supervisor Chapman and the auditor and go through each of the many funds, and particularly the teeter program, and bring back a report to the board. I don't think we're going to come up with $4 or $5 million, but
I would like to be part of that discussion. As a new, relatively new board member, it seems to me a little bit crazy that we don't know exactly how much money is where.
well, it's right here
Yeah.
in the reports you get every
I
month.
know, but I mean, there's this big cloud and controversy going around, and,
I think, I mean, we know where it is to the cent, there's just
how it
a
can be
difference of
used.
opinion.
Right,
of
right,
what's
I
available,
get that,
what's not
I get
available.
that. But I find it ironic that it's not.
Yeah. But it would be nice if everybody's on the same page regarding their
Yeah.
opinion,
We have to get everybody
We
on the
can't
same
keep
page.
having this debate every.
Well, yeah.
Let me do some basic math so you can kind of understand. So hopefully this can be something that Richard or Karen or Diane or whoever, the state controller can come up with. So I'm just going to round the numbers off, and don't hold me to this exact number, but this is the close approximation. Last time we checked, we have roughly $20 million based on our assessed valuation and property taxes. 70% of that goes to the schools, which is $14 million, and so therefore they're outside of the teeter thing, because that's a state thing, so when those monies eventually comes through, they get their share. 20% is the county share, which is our money, and we basically sit on a deadbeat tax bill up to 5 years before Richard would go out and sell it, and we get our money back plus the interest. So that money's not, teeter's not funding that. The city, I learned here this past year or so, and actually how I learned that was when the Dyer Mountain monies came in, that I discovered that the city opted years ago not to be part of the teeter program, even though they could be. So they basically wait, because they want the penalties and interest, so they're willing to wait on it. And they got a check for like $140,000 or $160,000 is their share of the Dyer tax money when it finally got paid. So they're outside of the program. That's $1 million. That 7% that they get is the overall tax bill is $1,400,000. So that leaves 3% of the property taxes that would go to somebody other than the city, the county, and the schools. And that's $600,000 a year. So that's what the teeter program is. So if you took the teeter program and for 5 years under the thing, 5 times 600,000 is $3 million. So that's the maximum amount of money. That's assuming that nobody paid their taxes, period. That's how much money the special districts and fire districts and the people who are in the other category would be out of luck, that we would have to cash flow. So even if you took 10% of that, let's say our delinquency factor is 10, and Richard probably could tell us off the top of his head, what's our delinquency factor? 2. Okay, but if you took 10%, so 10% of that $3 million is now $300,000. That was what the basis of determining how much you need to really fund in the teeter program. That's, at any given time, if we had 10% of the taxes paid every year, not paid every year for 5 years, the most that those 8 agencies, that we're gonna be paying Susan River Fire District and Clear Creek Community Service District and Big Valley Pest Abatement, whatever those agencies are, it would be roughly 300,000 is what we would have over the 5-year time period. And we have funded the Teeter program, you know, when we put the $2 million in from the Dyer tax payment, the $2 million of principal, not the interest and penalties, but the $2 million on top of the $1.5 million. We were looking at $3.5 million being set aside to fund a $300,000 program. And that's where I'm saying, you know, yeah, it was nice to do that because you've sheltered that money. It's not part of that $123 million that we had to work with the $104 million budget. That's above and beyond.
Carryover.
You know, those are the kind of things, and I realize that when, you know, administrators years past used to have the little black box. We always laughed about Bixby's black box. Whenever, you know, we never had money to do anything, but all of a sudden something come along, it had to be done, and he could reach into the black box, and here's $200,000, and we go, wow, where did that all come from? And that was kind of the magic act and stuff. And in the back of our mind, we knew there was all of these pots being shoveled around. And that's what I'm saying, is that when we sit there and we tell the community, oh no, we don't have any money to build this or fix that or do that, you know, and we have those kind of resources, that's the issue that I have, okay? So Teeter should be, I mean, even if we funded Teeter in its maximum amount, and that's when nobody pays any taxes at all, okay, then we probably would have a serious issue. And these numbers, by the way, if you take a look at the auditor's reports that she's published, this is nothing new. She's been sunshining and daylighting this information for several years now. So I'm not making up my numbers. These are using those numbers.
When the whole Teeter thing came up, I mean, I had my notes, I brushed up, and I was pretty well read and versed on it. But I'd have to relook at everything before I could really.
You know, I agree, and I think you should, and you'd be remiss not to. I mean, it's a very easy concept, but it's also a very complicated concept. But you have folks in the system who purposely want to go like this with the numbers so that you're so confused, you push back, I'm not an accountant, so therefore I don't understand it. You know, I tried to sell that concept to the voters this spring. I mean, I failed miserably. Okay, but the reality is there's money there. And don't tell me there isn't money there, and don't tell me let's go out and borrow money at whatever interest rate, you know, when we've got money that we could be using. You know, borrow it from me. I'll be happy to loan you the money and you can pay me back at whatever rate. It's a lot more than what Leif is going to give you. I saw my 457 thing and, you know, I lost, you know, $398 or something because, you know, it didn't earn it. I would have been better off in Leif. I'd just soon take my money invested in these kind of dollars. I'll loan it to you if you'll pay me the money back with the premium.
One other point I'd just like to make is that the comparison from Leif to a borrowing rate, I don't think is appropriate. I mentioned this at the JPA meeting. Leif is an overnight investment that is earning 0.25% because we're at the historic low interest rates for all of our lifetimes. I don't think that it's appropriate to project that it's going to be like that for the next 15 years, which is essentially what you do when you talk about using that as a discount rate. As Jared indicated, that Leif rate has varied from 7% to 0.25% over the last few years. I favor a discount rate closer to 5% if we're talking about loaning money to a JPA over a 15-year period, or contributing it. I made that point at the JPA meeting last week, and I don't think it's.
But again,
We'll
I think,
receive.
you know,
Yeah, let's get back to the,
step one is let's
Right.
go through with Jim, yourself, and the auditor, and let's come back.
I want Tom to be a part of that too.
yeah, I'll be there. Let's
Because
uncloud
he's
this.
going to have to be the institutional member when I'm gone.
You're in trouble.
I've already emailed the auditor, and perhaps we'll set up a meeting for next week.
Okay,
I have one thing I would like to
don't do it Wednesday.
add, Mr. Chairman, if I could, to the discussion, and that is, I wasn't able to attend last week's, the full board meeting from 2 weeks ago now, I guess it was. And I wasn't able to attend I was discouraged from attending the workshop the week before that in terms of how they were scoping out the size of the project. And so, therefore, I'm at a disadvantage because these numbers that we're now looking at for what the costs are for construction and everything are not something that I'm familiar with, have bought into, or feel comfortable with. And, you know, for a long time, we were looking at maybe building just a bare bones basic pool for basically $1 million, maybe a little bit under, a little bit over for the hole in the ground and, you know, the pumps and what you have to do to operate the pool. It doesn't include all the amenities that you have to have restrooms and this and that, whatever, you know, a park bench here or a tire swing there, whatever you want to throw into the mix. And so for me, a project, you know, basic, and that's what the voters have communicated, they would like to have something basic. So each time we seem to have a meeting or we bring in a consultant or something, the size and scope of the project seems to kind of be growing. And I know in the, from based on what I read in the newspaper from the workshop, there again not being able to attend was at a disadvantage. We were talking about building a $2.5 million pool, which that would include probably a few more things than just a hole in the ground, but you know, in terms of what those costs are. So I was really kind of flabbergasted when I saw in the city council packet last week the letter that we have before us in terms of this $3.5 million proposal, how it has kind of escalated. And so as one member of that board, I'm going to be actively looking to try to validate and verify and become comfortable. But I would like the board to know that I'm not on that page. I'm not there yet. And so this idea of asking for $1.7 million is not something I totally feel comfortable with. And just as I'm dogged about these numbers, I'm going to be dogged about those numbers too. I want that sold to me. And, you know, the consultant, when he had his workshop, you know, he worked with Jared, and I'm not sure who else, but that was not something that was driven by the board members. It was not something that the board said, okay, here's a budget for $2 million or $1 million or $5 million to go build something. Give us the design for that. And that was what he presented as probably a bare bones things. And as Mr. Egan shared with me after he attended the meeting, that we don't get a whole lot of money, a lot of product for the $2 million or whatever it was that the figure they were working with. And that's probably the case. And that's in part designed to be there because the less that project's going to cost, the more favorability it's going to have with the people on the street. And that's something that maybe the consultant doesn't totally appreciate, maybe our staff doesn't appreciate, maybe this board doesn't even appreciate, but I can tell you the people do appreciate the importance of that, and we should not lose sight of that aspect. So we're going to look at how we fund it, and if it's $1.5 million, you know, okay, that's $750,000 each, and that's $400,000 we've already put in the pot, so you know, maybe we're only talking about $300,000, not $1,300,000. So that's something that we need to also sort out in this discussion on the financing. And what Mr. Wilson and I proposed last year and what has kind of morphed and grown into is a little bit different than what I kind of anticipated. And I'm not saying that maybe what we are looking at is an improvement and something I can embrace. But you got to give me a chance to embrace it. It's not something that I have to, here it's on the table, it's a fait accompli, because if that's the case, you know, I also reserve the opportunity to say no, so I might even want to join in this guy. Like, you've been voting yes on here, man, you're trying to scare us.
I think you're screwed up.
I heard him say aye and he changed his vote.
You know what he did, okay.
The reason that I bring up the timing of the construction is for a couple reasons, but the most important is that depending on how we approach funding this, if it's done at budget time, it allows for much more flexibility than if it's done at any other time of the
We
year.
have to have a 4/5 vote to amend the budget to move those monies from those other accounts into
Correct.
appropriation items, so.
And so if it's the JPA's goal to begin construction before the beginning of next fiscal year, that's one set of circumstances. If it's after the beginning of next fiscal year, it's another set of circumstances. Frankly, I think that's probably a reasonable time frame to start thinking about, you know, entering into contracts and construction rather than February. I just throw that out there because it does pose a different set of requirements.
I think we're gonna move the ball forward quite a bit once we determine the, answer to that question about the, whether, what we have available to even deliberate on, you know, on spending.
Well, I think,
or not
I
spending.
think,
You gotta first come up with it.
Mr. Chairman, there's a reason for us to be confused on the numbers, because as long as we're confused on the numbers, we can't take action.
So, I'm all for, you know, you guys having that meeting, and whatever the outcome is, it is what it is, but let's find out what it is.
agree with that 100%.
All right, we haven't taken any public comment yet, so let's, okay, I'll take public comment if there's anybody to weigh in on this, no? Alrighty, so we'll just provide direction to staff, which I think we've done, so let's move on. Good for you. Yeah.
He said it was to provide